73 years ago, on the 19th of March 1944, very early in the morning, a German soldier knocked on the door of the house where my father lived in Novi Sad, Serbia. He was wearing a gray uniform with a small SS emblem on his collar. In his hand he held a rifle with a bayonet. "I'm looking for Dr. Bela Lampel," he said. "This is me," my grandfather said. Dr. Lampel said, "The German soldier, get dressed and come with me." His mother, my great-grandmother, Hermina, approached the German soldier. She slowly got down on her knees and she hugged his knees. "Bitte," she said in German, "du hast auch eine Mutter zu Hause. You also have a mother at home." The SS officer didn't look at her. "Get dressed," he ordered my grandfather again. My grandfather got dressed and picked up a small bag which was waiting by the door. In those days in occupied Europe, every Jew kept a small bag by the door. He went to my father, a 13-year-old boy who was lying in the big bed, watching from under the covers. "My son," he said, "I'll either see you again or I won't." And he didn't. My father never saw his father again. My grandfather died in the Mauthausen concentration camp only 2 weeks before the camp was liberated. I went there not long ago with my sister at the invitation of the Austrian government. We stood in the gas chamber in the camp. I'm not a mystical person, but I knew, I physically felt in my body that in the final moments of his life, he didn't just wait for death to come. He clawed and scratched at the door with all his strength and screamed and fought until the end because he had a child, because he wanted to go back home to his child. When I was 13-year-old, I asked my father, why didn't they run away? He said, because we didn't have anywhere to run to. In the whole huge world, there wasn't one place, one country to which the Jews could escape. There was the Jewish Air Force to bomb the train lines which led to the concentration camps. There was the Jewish Navy to take my father to a safe harbor. There was the Jewish state in which free Jews could protect themselves by themselves. There was no one to do it for them. When the war ended, a shocked and frightened world was exposed to incontrovertible testimony of the power of human evil. The piles of bodies at Auschwitz, the walking skeletons at Dachau, 1.5 million children murdered. The world was forced to recognize the simple fact that evil could win. That despite what we believe about ourselves, humans, people with loved ones and children of their own, with birthdays and with mothers, are capable of putting a gun to the head of a baby and pulling the trigger, and then doing it again and again and again. The world also looked at what happened and was forced to admit that the German death machine couldn't have existed without the help of other nations. Poles and Ukrainians, Romanians and Hungarians, French and Dutch. The hatred and murder wasn't limited to one specific group. It wasn't the work of a few isolated psychopaths. They were everywhere. When the clouds of war and horror lifted, the world was determined to do something to create a new and a better world. On the 29th of November 1947, less than 4 years after the German soldier took my grandfather, the world gathered at the United Nations to vote on the creation of a state for the Jews. The world recognized that we Jews have 6 million reasons not to rely on others. That the Jewish people would never again ask the enlightened world for protection. We will protect ourselves. All that is good and all that is horrifying in the human condition exists in those 4 years. The capacity to reach the very bottom, but also the ability to begin a process of redemption and restitution from that place. That's a choice. It's a choice the world made, and it's also our choice. Israel is a country which chooses life. In the book of Deuteronomy, it is written, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. That choice is the reason that in the 70 years that have passed since the UN resolution, Israel has become a strong, fascinating, and prosperous country. From the empty sands of the Middle Eastern desert, we created a high-tech superpower and flourishing culture, innovation, and science. Israel is also the only real democracy in the Middle East, a country which proudly protects human rights, minorities, the LGBT community, freedom of religion, and freedom of speech. But Israel's success hasn't removed horror and hate from our lives. They are always there. They may have changed shape and their modus operandi, but their victims are always the same, the weak and the innocent. Like Israel, the enlightened world has also hit by it again and again. The Twin Towers in New York, the underground in London, and the train in Madrid, the promenade in Nice, the Bataclan nightclub in Paris. This is a war. It is a war. 70 years after it was founded, Israel is the only country in the United Nations which another country, Iran, is openly threatens to wipe off the face of the earth. Once again, we are talked about in terms of a final solution, of total eradication, and the word doesn't even skip a bit. Iran is building military bases in Syria, only a few kilometers from our border. A country which threatens our complete destruction is once again building the capacity and the capability to do exactly that. The new reality in Syria is that Iran is going from boots on the ground to roots on the ground. This is why there is no scenario in which Israel can or should ever be expected to return the Golan Heights. Had we returned them to Syria as the word demanded, we would have had the Iranian soldiers staring down at the Galilee and Iranian artillery aimed directly at our cities. This is the time for the world to recognize full Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights, and this is also the time for the entire world to recognize United Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Policies should not be dictated by threats and intimidation. If violence is the only argument against moving the embassy to Jerusalem, then it only proves it is the right thing to do. Now is the time to do what is right. I am not afraid. I am not a victim. No SS officer will enter my home in Tel Aviv early in the morning. The Jews have the ability and the strength to protect themselves. We're not asking the world to protect us anymore. We want to fight with the world, alongside the world, against terror, against injustice, against the fact that evil has raised its ugly head once again. 13-year-old children in Israel, in Europe, in the United States, and in the Middle East expect us to fight for them. We need to face those who choose death, terror, and destruction and prove once again that we choose life. Thank you very much.